So we've tried not to do this for the entire first season because it honestly just feels too easy. But it turns out, like Joe Biden in a Chuck E. Cheese, in the end we just couldn't resist the temptation. When it comes to the president, most of the criticism surrounds the things we've already talked about. That he's old and senile and old, really old and really senile. But the problem with Joe Biden is that his age and senility are almost becoming a shield for something that's been true for decades. He's a terrible human being. In 2020, when he ran a presidential campaign from his basement, his strength was always that he didn't seem that threatening. Sure, he can't chew solid food, but how much damage could he possibly do? This was partnered with the fact that he was presented as a moderate, and boom, Joe Biden was the non-threatening old grandpa America thought it needed to banish the big bad orange man. But under the cardigans and behind the false teeth lurked the same crappy person who's been in public life since the 1970s. So I want to talk about that person, and the many layers of slime and sludge that make up Joe Biden. First and foremost, Joe Biden is a massive liar. Yeah, politicians lie, that's basically all they do. But Joe Biden is perhaps the ultimate liar. As president, almost everything that dribbles out of his mouth, not including his oatmeal, just isn't true. He vowed to be a unifying president, after campaigning on a platform that labeled GOP senators as Nazis and continued to label his opposition as domestic terrorists or fascists or ultra-MAGA traitors. He promised to shut down the virus, and then when this didn't happen, he blamed the Trump administration, even though they were the reason he had a vaccine to distribute in the first place. He lied about gas prices as part of his administration's effort to label the American economic collapse as part of Putin's price hike, and even blamed gas prices on the price gouging of your local gas station.
Russia's aggression is costing us all, and it's no time for profiteering or price gouging. It's simply not true that my administration or policies are holding back domestic energy production. That's simply not true.
Not only is this not true, gas stations have a net profit margin of less than 2% for gas, Biden is quite literally stifling domestic energy production, slashing 97% of oil and gas leases. He lied about January 6th, schools reopening, that Trump told all people to inject themselves with bleach, that his administration wasn't opening new migrant centers, that a border crisis wasn't happening, that Afghanistan was under control, that taxes wouldn't be raised on anyone making under $400,000, that Georgia's election laws stop people from voting. He's lied about gun control, that assault weapon bans reduce gun violence, that he's reducing the deficit. And then there are the relaxed little lies that come to Joe Biden oh so easily, like claiming that the media thought his 100 million vaccinated Americans plan was impossible, even though that would require a slower pace than Trump had achieved, or that the vaccine didn't exist when he took office, or that more people died from COVID than during World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11, which is ridiculously untrue, and that Republicans are the ones who wanted to defund the police. And what about Joe Biden's habit of simply making up stories, regardless of how weird or irrelevant they are? He said an Amtrak train conductor congratulated him on traveling 1.5 million miles, even though the conductor retired decades before this story even took place. He said he was an all-star player at a congressional baseball game, saying he hit a ball 358 feet. He said he was a professor after his stint as vice president, but he never taught a class. He said he used to drive an 18-wheeler. He said he visited the Pittsburgh synagogue after the 2018 mass shooting. He didn't. He said he was invited by Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir during the Six-Day War to act as a liaison, even though she wasn't elected until 2 years after that war. He said his family worried about rising gas prices when he was a child, even though gas prices were flat at the time. He made up a story about receiving an appointment to attend a naval academy. He lied about how many times he visited the Middle East and how many hours he spent with China's President Xi. Oh, and that he's Puerto Rican.
We have a very, in relative terms, large Puerto Rican population in Delaware. And so I was sort of raised in the Puerto Rican community at home, politically.
He also has a weird habit of stealing people's work, whether it be law review articles, speeches by British politicians, or JFK. But none of these compare to Joe Biden's habit of lying to gain sympathy. Now, Joe Biden has experienced tragedy. In 1972, his first wife and 1-year-old daughter were killed in a car accident, with their station wagon being hit by a semi-truck. And in 2015, Biden's eldest son, Beau Biden, died from an aggressive form of brain cancer. Tragic? Yes. But for Biden, every tragedy is an opportunity, using it as a political lubricant. Politico even reported in 2019 that Joe Biden has made grief his superpower. He's used the death of his son, again from brain cancer, to try and draw a connection between himself and the families of gun violence victims.
Gun violence in this country is an epidemic. Let me say it again. Gun violence in this country is an epidemic, and it's an international embarrassment. They know what it's like to bury a piece of their soul deep in the earth. We understand that. What a lot of you, hopefully many of you, don't know is you've gone through a trauma. No matter how much you work to make sure others don't go through it, every time you show up at an event like this, it brings back when you got that phone call.
He's claimed that Beau Biden died because of so-called burn pits, something he has no evidence for, and he uses his son's death any chance he gets to avoid the issue at hand and to gain sympathy. According to the mother of one US service member who was murdered during Biden's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, Biden kept interrupting her to talk about his son. And yes, I'm sure Biden loved his son, and his son's death is tragic, but his son has become a get-out-of-jail-free card for Biden. He's tried to do the same thing with his wife and daughter's death, even smearing the driver of the semi-truck as being drunk, even though, again, he has no evidence. Now, the reason Joe Biden lies so freely about everything is actually pretty simple. He has no principles. None. Zero. As he would say, nada. If you look at his many decades in office, Joe Biden has done nothing except move with the wind to stay in office. Think of any high-level issue in American politics, and Joe Biden has either lied about it or changed his position from one extreme to the other. Basically, whatever he needs to do, he'll do without a second's thought. In the 80s, he helped drive and boasted about a slew of law enforcement bills, giving passionate speeches arguing that you can be a progressive and lock the SOBs up.
I wasn't wedded to the notion. Every time Richard Nixon, when I was running in 1972, would say law and order, the Democratic mantra, the response was law and order with justice, whatever that meant. And I'd say lock the SOBs up.
But now he's saying it was all a big mistake, and that white America has to admit that systemic racism exists and is going unnoticed, despite the fact that he helped build that system. On the subject of China, the United States' primary adversary on the world stage, not only does Joe Biden allegedly have disturbing business ties through various family members, he can't even decide whether China is a threat or not. In 2019, Biden said that we are in competition with China, that we need to get tough with China, and that China is a serious challenge to us and a threat. A few weeks later, he said that they're not bad folks, they're not competition, and they're not a threat. What about abortion? For decades, Joe Biden was reliably anti-abortion. He voted for the Hyde Amendment in 1976, which prevents the use of federal funds to pay for most abortions. He voted to save it in 1993. The Foreign Assistance Act of 1981 still contains a Biden amendment which bans American aid from being used for abortions. He pushed for states' rights to overturn Roe v. Wade, which he said was wrongly decided in 1973 and went too far in 1974. He supported the Mexico City policy, which stopped federal funds from going to organizations which provide abortion services, and he voted for partial birth abortion bans on 2 occasions. In 1981, he even voted to remove rape and incest exceptions in abortion law. But now Biden is the figurehead of an undeniably pro-abortion political party. When the Supreme Court overturned the decision he called wrongly decided, he said it was a sad day, and is now part of a growing effort to present abortion as a human right at any stage of pregnancy. What about gay marriage? Well, Biden is inconsistent there too, depending on what's needed at the time. He said homosexuals are security risks in 1973. He voted to cut off funding for schools that taught the acceptance of homosexuality in 1994, and as recently as 2006, confirmed that marriage is between a man and a woman. But just a few years later, he was claiming to have been a long-term voice in favor of gay rights, aided by this particularly creative story.
I remember my dad. My dad, God love him. It was 1961, and I was applying for a job as a lifeguard in the city pool system because they paid better than the county job I had. And he dropped me off at the town square, Rodney Square, and there were 2 men in suits like I'm wearing standing in a corner. The light was red, and they kissed as I was getting out of the car, and I looked back at my dad. Like, I hadn't seen that before. And he said, it's simple, Joe. They love each other.
He's flipped on ending the filibuster, whether families should be reunited after being separated at the border, reopening schools, refugee numbers, stimulus checks, essentially anything important in American life. Maybe he needs to endlessly lie because he doesn't know what he's doing. Take a look at the world after Joe Biden. Afghanistan is a shit show because Biden suddenly decided we had to leave. Russia invaded Ukraine because they knew they could get away with it. And we're now sending energy to China, even though they brought the world to its knees during COVID-19. But anyone who's paying any attention knew this would happen. Just on the subject of foreign policy, Joe Biden has gone from one disaster to the next for years. This is the same Joe Biden who opposed Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, which aided the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. He voted against the first Gulf War and for the second one. He opposed the raid to kill Osama bin Laden, and he bolstered the drone war, which has led to hundreds of civilian casualties across the world. The rule is simple. If Biden thinks something on the world stage, the opposite is true. But then there's something that goes beyond lying or incompetence that people continue to ignore when it comes to Joe Biden. And this is the fact that he's a freaking creep. And not because he's whispering into the microphone.
I don't want to hear any more about you don't like looking at him.
Or yelling into the microphone.
We're changing people's lives.
Both of which I'll admit are pretty weird. But nowhere near as bad as the fact that he just can't keep his hands off children. And if they're out of reach, there's a plan B. He flirts with them.
Thank you.
No, you come over here. That's it. Keep going. You're going to stand right next to me. There you go. And then we're going to switch here. You two come here.
There we go.
You got it? Okay.
And then people in the back, you can spread out.
Very good. Everybody else is looking forward to it.
Did you want to get Vice President? There we go.
Okay. Grandpa's one of those guys.
That's nice of you.
No, I'm not saying. He knows I do.
Come on in.
Do you know what my dad used to say? Your granddaughters have one important job. Take care of the pop. This is a long day. A lot of walking. That's right, everybody. Don't tell me what you're talking about. Here we go. That's it. Right over here. There we go. You can put it away. I love those barrettes in her hair, man. I tell you what. And look at her. She looks like she's 19 years old, sitting there with her, like a little lady with her legs crossed.
And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Gotta say hi to me. We go back a long way. She was 12, I was 30, but anyway, this woman helped me get an awful lot done. At any rate.
And what about this endless hug with Hillary Clinton? You know something's really bad when you feel sorry for Hillary. Whenever we talk about Joe Biden these days, it's really easy to focus on the obvious, like him forgetting where he is, or Jill Biden guiding him on and off the stage, or his inability to form basic coherent sentences. And yes, that's all really important because, as we've discussed before, the mental fitness of our politicians is truly all that matters. But this becomes a double-edged sword because people's expectations for Biden are so low that he gets away with murder. Yes, Joe Biden is old. And yes, he probably has dementia, but that doesn't change the fact that the Joe Biden of the last 50 plus years is still a shameless and incompetent liar who is all too happy to profit politically on the back of dead family members. Joe Biden has built his career on lies, whether it be the economy, foreign policy, education, transportation, energy, or even his own family history. He spins lies like almost no one in modern politics. And he uses his lies to hide from the disastrous and sometimes deadly consequences of his actions. There's perhaps no better image that sums up Joe Biden, a man who's so concerned about climate change that he's single-handedly trying to destroy the American energy industry, than posing in an 8-cylinder, gas-guzzling 1967 Corvette, inviting you to get in. But if you learn anything from this show, is that if Joe Biden pulls up to you in any vehicle and asks you to get in, don't. Thanks for watching. If you like that clip, subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can watch full episodes and other clips just like this one. Make sure you ring the bell for notifications and tell all your friends about it.